Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, I, Satyaveer Singh Consul, welcome you all on today's program, which is being held online. In association with Scottish Association of Bengali Arts and Sanskritic Heritage, Sabas, we are celebrating 125th birth anniversary of the great freedom fighter and our beloved leader, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, as a part of Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. The birthday of Netaji has been declared as Prakram Divas by the Government of India since 2021. It has also been decided that the celebration of Republic Day, which falls on 26th January, would also start from 23rd of January from this year onward. To commence our program for today, I would request Consul General Sri Vijay Selvaraj ji and Ranjit Sinha ji, President of Shabas, to offer floral tributes to Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. I welcome both the distinguished guests to come on this. Thank you, Vijayji and Ranjitji, for doing the honor. Netaji was born into a wealthy, privileged, and a large Bengali family in Cuttack on this day in 1897. He was a brilliant student. After college, he was sent to England to prepare for Indian civil services. He succeeded with distinction in the first part of the examination, but however, he demurred at taking the routine final exam, citing nationalism to be of a higher calling. I would like to quote from one of his letters to his brother Sharat Chandra Bose to underline the above point. Quote, but for a man of my temperament, who has been feeding on ideas that might be called eccentric, the line of this resistance is not the best line to follow. The uncertainties of life are not appalling to one who has not, at heart, worldly ambitions. Moreover, it's not possible to serve one's country in the best and fullest manner if one is chained on to the civil services. Unquote. Netaji returned to India in 1921 and joined the nationalist movement led by Mahatma Gandhi and the Indian National Congress. Netaji stood for unqualified Swaraj, that is self-governance, including the use of force against the British rule. This meant a confrontation with Mahatma Gandhi, who was a strong votary of non-violence, who even opposed Bose's presidency. But despite that, Netaji was elected as the president of Congress in 1938 at Haripura session. He was again re-elected as president in 1939 by defeating Gandhi's nominee, Patabi Sitaramaiah. But because of differences between him and Gandhiji, and out of respect for Gandhiji, he decided to resign as the party president. That we are stationed in Scotland, I cannot resist myself mentioning that Netaji had some affiliation with Scotland also. He studied at Scottish Church College in Kolkata, from where he did his BS degree. At the outbreak of Second World War, Bose opposed Lord Linlithgow's decision to declare declare war on behalf of India without consulting the Congress. He also organized mass protests in Kolkata, so he was arrested by the British Raj in July 1940 and was kept in Kolkata's presidency jail. After a week's hunger strike, fearing that he may die because of hunger strike and which may incite strong sentiments of patriotism, Netaji was sent home in November 1940, but he was kept under surveillance. Somehow, Netaji managed to escape from home and from the British rule to Kabul in the guise of Muhammad Ziauddin and a deaf and dumb Pathan. And therefrom, that is from Kabul, he escaped to Germany via Samarkand and Moscow in the name of an Indian diplomat, Mr. Orlando Majato. The above journey has been described by Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore in Badnaam, probably his last story. From Germany, Netaji traveled to Sumatra, which was under Japanese occupation at that time, for furthering his efforts towards India's freedom movement. We all know that Gandhiji raised Indian National Army in Singapore out of Indian soldiers who were earlier fighting for the British but were defeated by the Japanese forces. He established first provisional government of India in Andaman Nicobar Islands. During one of INS campaigns in Manipur, Nagaland, he famously exhorted Indian soldiers to join his forces by pronouncing the inspiring slogan, "Tum mujhe khoon do, main tumhe azadi dunga." That's give me blood and I will give you the freedom. He also coined the slogan Dilli Chalo, which was towards attainment of freedom for India. And who can forget the eternal slogan Jai Hind, which we always use. That was also coined or popularized more by Netaji. Referring to Netaji, the New York Times at that time reported that he is the George Washington of India. Even while having disagreements with the means adopted by Netaji, Mahatma Gandhi told his biographer that Netaji was patriot par excellence. Khushi Naroji, the granddaughter of grand old man of Dadabhai Naroji, grand old man of India, Dadabhai Naroji, also mentioned to Louis Fisher, Gandhi's biographer, that had Netaji returned to India as chief of Indian armed forces, probably he would have been more popular than even Jawaharlal Nehru, and he might have matched some of Mahatma Gandhi's criteria, Mahatma Gandhi's charisma. I won't go into deeper details about the life, vision, and legacy of Netaji. I am leaving the same for our keynote speaker, whom I will announce later. In today's program, besides the talk by our keynote speaker, we shall have some small speeches by Sri Vijay Selvaraj, Consulate General of India, and Sri Ranjit Sinha ji, President of Shabas, and a few cultural items. In order to move the program further, I would request Sri Vijay Selvaraj, Consul General of India, to deliver his address. Vijay Selvaraj, sir.
Thank you, Satyaveji, for your introduction. A very good afternoon to all our viewers who are joining us today in this program. Joining in to pay tribute to one of India's greatest icons and leader of India's freedom struggle on his 125th birthday, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. I convey my thanks to the Scottish Association of Bengali Arts and Sanskritic Heritage for helping put together this program. I also thank and convey my sincere appreciation to Dr. Sumatra Bose for joining us today and agreeing to speak on Netaji. Netaji commanded great respect and admiration in his time for his determination to win freedom for India. The inaugural today of a hologram image of Netaji at India Gate is a fitting tribute to his courage and conviction of a free India. We look forward to the day when we would have the actual statue installed at India Gate. Netaji's ideals shall continue to inspire the present and future generations. This 125th anniversary, I think, is an apt time for us to recall what he stood for, the values that he stood for, and the fight against colonial rule in India, which ultimately led to India gaining freedom in 1947. I look forward to this evening's program. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your informative speech. As I said earlier, we are celebrating today's event in association with Scottish Association of Bengali Arts and Sanskrit Heritage, Shabas. The Shabas was founded by an initiative from enthusiastic Indian Bengali residents of Edinburgh interested in the promotion of Bengali art, culture, and heritage in Edinburgh and in Scotland through medium of cultural events, short films, exhibition, and celebration of popular Bengali festivals of India. Since 2014, Shabas has been organizing a number of events every year. Shabas is headed by Sri Ranjit Sinha, who is an IT professional also. I would request Sri Ranjit Sinha ji to say a few words on this occasion. Sri Sinha ji.
Thank you, Satyavirji. Please excuse me for my bad voice today. On the occasion of 125th birth anniversary, I bow to our beloved national hero, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, and I would like to wish everyone a very happy Netaji Jayanti. I would like to thank Consul General Sri Vijay Silvaraj and HOC Sri Satyavir Singh ji and the Indian Consulate Office of Edinburgh to collaborate with us to celebrate this very special day together. We are all aware of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose's monumental contributions towards India and India's independence. And with the recent few years, we are also enhancing our knowledge through different initiatives and the social media platforms about Netaji and his contribution. Sometimes I think that Netaji's principles, his ideologies, and his thoughts were ahead of his time. For us, the Bengalis, we see Netaji a bit differently, a very near and dear to us. In most of the Bengali households, you will find Netaji's photo near the shrine, near the study area, in the schools, in the colleges, in social clubs. Basically, we see him as someone to look up to in our day-to-day life. As soon as we hear Netaji's name, it ignites the positive energy within us. For us, Netaji means fiery courage. For us, Netaji means strength, inner strength. For us, Netaji means absolute freedom. For us, Netaji means immense passion. For us, Netaji means patriotism. For us, Netaji means women empowerment. For us, Netaji means a lot to many of us. Thank you so much. Jai Hind. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your kind words, Ranjit ji. Now we shall enjoy a dance performance. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome a very talented artist, member of Shabas Bengali community in Edinburgh and founder of Nikon Dance Academy, Mrs. Tanvi Bhattacharya. Besides the performance, she has also conceptualized the design, choreography, and the outdoor shootings which shoot the today's event. She would have preferred to perform live, but since she is currently in India, she has made a video for the event. Let's enjoy the video.
কারার ওই লৌহ কপাট ভেঙে ফেল কর রেলোপাট রক্ত জমাট শিকল পূজার পাষাণ বেদী
কারার ওই লৌহ কপাট ভেঙে ফেল কর রেলোপাট রক্ত জমাট শিকল পূজার পাষাণ বেদী
ওরে ও তরু নিশান বাজা তোর প্রলয় বিষান ধ্বংস নিশান উরূপ প্রাচীর প্রাচীর বেদী ওরে ও তরু নিশান বাজা তোর প্রলয় নিশান ধ্বংস নিশান উরূপ প্রাচীর প্রাচীর বেদী কারার ওই লৌহ কপাট ভেঙে ফেল কর রেলোপাট রক্ত জমাট শিকল পূজার পাষাণ বেদী
গাজনের বাজনা বাজা কে মালিক কে সে রাজা গাজনের বাজনা বাজা কে মালিক কে সে রাজা কে দেয় সাজা মুক্ত স্বাধীন সত্য কেড়ে কে দেয় সাজা মুক্ত স্বাধীন সত্য কেড়ে
হা 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 পায় যে হাসি ভগবান পড়বে ফাঁসি সর্বনাশী শিখায় এহীন তথ্য কেড়ে কারার ওই লৌহ কপাট ভেঙে ফেল কর রেলোপাট রক্ত জমাট শিকল পূজার পাষাণ বেদী
लुटाए जा, खुशी के गीत गाए जा, ये जिंदगी है कौम की, तू कौम पे लुटाए जा, कदम कदम बढ़ाए जा, खुशी के गीत गाए जा, ये जिंदगी है कौम की, तू कौम पे लुटाए जा। शेर हिंद आगे बढ़ने से तू कभी न डर, उड़ा के दुश्मनों का सर जो शेर वतन बढ़ाए जा। तू शेर हिंद आगे बढ़ने से तू कभी न डर, उड़ा के दुश्मनों का सर जो शेर वतन बढ़ाए जा, कदम कदम बढ़ाए जा, खुशी के गीत गाए जा, ये जिंदगी है कौम की, तू कौम पे लुटाए जा। ওরে ও পাগলা ভোলা দেরে দে প্রলয় দোলা, ওরে ও পাগলা ভোলা দেরে দে প্রলয় দোলা।
কারদ গুলা জোরসে ধরে হ্যাচকা টানে, কারদ গুলা জোরসে ধরে হ্যাচকা টানে।
মার হাক হায়দারি হাক, কাঁধে নে দুন্ধুভি ডাক, ডাক ওরে ডাক, মৃত্যুকে ডাক জীবন পানে।
কারা রইল কপাট, ভেঙে ফেল কর্ণের পাট, রক্ত জমাট শীতল পূজার পাষাণ বেদী।
हिम्मत तेरी बढ़ती रहे, खुदा तेरी सुनता रहे, जो सामने तेरे खड़े तू खाक में मिलाए जा। हिम्मत तेरी बढ़ती रहे, खुदा तेरी सुनता रहे, जो सामने तेरे खड़े तू खाक में मिलाए जा, कदम कदम बढ़ाए जा, खुशी के गीत गाए जा, ये जिंदगी है कौम की, तू कौम पे लुटाए जा, कदम कदम बढ़ाए जा, खुशी के गीत गाए जा, ये जिंदगी है कौम की, तू कौम पे लुटाए जा।
Thank you, Tanavi, for taking time while you were still holidaying in India. That was really excellent. Moving on, we have with us for taking time while you were still holidaying in India. That was really excellent. Moving on, we have with us for taking time. We have with us our next esteemed guest of the evening, our keynote speaker. I won't go through his full biodata as it would take a while to mention all his accomplishments and achievements. He was born and grew up in Calcutta and did his schooling in India and then proceeded to USA for higher studies. He graduated from Amherst College of Massachusetts with a BA with highest honors in 1992 and followed it up with MA, MPhil and PhD degrees in political science in Columbia University, New York, USA. In 1999, he joined the prestigious London School of Economics and Political Science, where he is still working as the professor of international and comparative politics. He is a prolific writer and editor. Several of his books have been published by the top universities of the world. Our distinguished guest is also a regular contributor to many leading international media houses like CNN and BBC. He is the son of Dr. Cecil Kumar Bose, a pediatrician and freedom fighter, and Srimati Krishna Bose, Nee Chaudhary, professor of English, writer, and a former member of Lok Sabha. He is grandson of Sri Sat Chandra Bose, a nephew of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. Ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome Dr. Sumant Bose, who is the grandnephew of our very own Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. May I request Dr. Sumant Bose to deliver his talk titled Netaji at 125, Vision and Legacy. Dr. Sumant Bose, please.
Jai Hind. It's indeed a privilege to join you all on what is for me now the evening of Netaji's milestone 125th birth anniversary. It's almost 10 p.m. in the evening now because I am joining you from Calcutta, Kolkata, and I'm actually speaking to you from the historic Netaji Bhavan, the Bose family's former ancestral mansion located on 38 by 2 Elgin Road, now Lala Lajpat Rai Sarani, in honor of that freedom fighter from the Punjab. It's been a busy day for me, as you can imagine. I am the director of the Netaji Research Bureau based here at Netaji Bhavan. Netaji Research Bureau was started by my late father, Dr. Shishir Kumar Bose, way back in 1957, so more than 6 decades ago. And my mother, who passed away less than 2 years ago, Mrs. Krishna Bose, author, professor, and former 3-time member of the Lok Sabha, was Netaji Research Bureau's chairperson from 2000, the time of my father's death, until her own death in 2020. Some of you know this already, but I'm sitting in the very house from which Netaji's great escape took place in January 1941, 81 years ago. It was on the night of 16th, 17th January 1941 that my father, Shishir Bose, a young medical student, then aged just 20, secretly drove his uncle out of this house in a hair-raising escape, took him as far as the Gomo railway junction in Bihar, which is about 335 kilometers or 210 miles from Calcutta. It's now in Jharkhand. And from then on, Netaji went on to Peshawar, from Peshawar to Kabul, and then from Kabul through the Soviet Union to Berlin. So the ascent of Subhash Chandra Bose to becoming India's and the subcontinent's beloved and revered Netaji can be said to have begun from this very house 81 years ago. Until then, although he was, of course, one of the very top leaders of the Indian freedom movement, he was still known largely as Subhash Babu. After his escape, from this house and the beginning of the final climactic phase of his life of struggle, he became Netaji, India's eternal Netaji. Just this morning, we had a wonderful traditional ceremony, a program which has been happening in this house for 75 years, in fact, since 1946, to commemorate Netaji's 125th birth anniversary. And for those of you who are interested, I would urge you to take a look at our YouTube channel, where it was live streamed, but it's still there, on our website, netaji.org. That's easy enough to remember, I think, netaji.org. The topic I chose for my short talk today is, as you know, Netaji at 125, Vision and Legacy. Let me explain why I chose this particular title and focus. When we think of Netaji, or when many of us think of Netaji, we think of him primarily, sometimes at least, perhaps quite often, as a romantic hero, as well as a swashbuckling action figure. And this is not wrong, but it amounts, if it is not supplemented by a deeper understanding of Netaji's life, it amounts to a somewhat simplistic and superficial understanding of who Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose was and what he represented, the ideals and the values that he represented. Netaji was a visionary leader who thought very deeply about the future of India once it was freed from the yoke of colonial slavery. He had a particular vision for free India, and it's that vision and the ideological legacy that it represents which will form the main part of my talk, but I'll get to that in just a few minutes' time. Netaji is the ultimate romantic hero, isn't he? Just think of it. The famous escape from this very house, Netaji Bhavan, in Calcutta, 81 winters ago. It's an incredible story in itself. And of course, it had historic consequences. Or just think 2 years later, in February 1943, the same man, Subhash Chandra Bose, gets on a German submarine, a U-boat, in the German northern port of Kiel, which is a bit north of Hamburg, and travels underwater around the world for 93 days until he lands at Sumatra, at a place called Sabang, which is part of Sumatra. It's actually an island just off Sumatra in Indonesia. How many people have done that? I don't think anyone else had such a life of incredible adventure. Sometimes, as the cliche goes, fact is stranger than fiction. And this is an exemplar of that cliche. He is traveling underwater in a world at war for more than 3 months, between February and May 1943, in order to get from Europe to East Asia, where, of course, he took over the leadership of the Indian National Army and of the Azad Hind movement and launched the final climactic struggle for India's freedom. Some of you may be wondering about the portrait that you can see behind me in the backdrop. I'm sitting in the Shishir Kumar Bose conference room, which is our boardroom at Netaji Bhavan. And the portrait behind me is a sketch that my father, Shishir Bose, did at the age of 14 in 1934, based on a portrait photograph that Netaji, his uncle, had sent to his mother, my grandmother, my father's mother, Bibhabati Bose, the wife of Sharat Chandra Bose, from Europe, where he was then in forced exile and was acting as a roving, hyperactive ambassador of India's freedom movement abroad. So the images of the ultimate romantic hero, the swashbuckling action figure, are not wrong. Just recall the photographs or that inspiring footage of him in his simple uniform as the Supreme Commander of the Indian National Army, the Azad Hind Fauj. What a dashing figure he cuts in that uniform. I mean, look at his, well, to use a somewhat colloquial term, his body language, his movements, everything about him, and of course his historic speeches at that time delivered in Singapore, especially in July 1943, are just inspirational. You can see why hundreds of thousands of people flocked to the Azad Hind movement once he arrived in East Asia. You can see why the Indian National Army, the Azad Hind Fauj, was so rejuvenated under his leadership, and even in an adverse strategic environment in military terms, was able to liberate some parts, bits and parts of India, notably at least half of the present-day state of Manipur. But as I said a few minutes ago, we need to go beyond the images of the ultimate romantic hero and the swashbuckling action figure who inspired millions of people and continues to inspire hundreds of millions today, in order to gain a full, deep understanding of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. Netaji thought very deeply, as I said, about the future of free India, how it should be organized, and what the priorities of the sovereign government of free India should be. He was truly a visionary leader, and above all, we need to remember the ideological legacy that his unfulfilled vision, I have to say unfulfilled, unfortunately, but it's regrettably true, what that unfulfilled ideological legacy represents. And it gives us a goal, I think, in the 75th year of our independence for all of us to strive towards in our own little ways. Because nation building is a task that is a collective one, and all individuals must contribute. That is what Netaji believed, and that he repeatedly said. Now, I can talk endlessly about Netaji's vision and the ideological legacy that represents as a living ideal for us today to strive towards. But because of the paucity of time, I have chosen 3 areas of Netaji's vision to briefly talk to you about today. First, Netaji knew very well that the foremost and the most difficult challenge in free India would be tackling the poverty and inequality that's been our legacy from 2 centuries of colonial enslavement. Yes, we were politically subjugated. Yes, we were culturally degraded in the process. But perhaps the most lasting damage was not to our self-respect, which we managed to at least partly regain through our great freedom struggle, but the economic decimation of India under 2 centuries of British colonial rule. The ruthless exploitation for not years, not decades, but for a couple of centuries of India's resources and her people. Netaji became Congress president for the first time at the beginning of 1939. And in November 1939, he formed something called the National Planning Committee, or NPC, which was a body that he envisioned would steer India's economic resurgence once it was politically free. There's a famous photograph of Subhash Chandra Bose as the president of the Indian National Congress addressing the inaugural meeting of the National Planning Committee in November 1939. Because he was himself already the Congress president, he asked Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru to become the chairman of the National Planning Committee, and Pandit Nehru gladly accepted. So the photograph shows Subhash Chandra Bose speaking to the assembled experts and scientists at the first meeting of the National Planning Committee, while Pandit Nehru sits beside him taking notes carefully. Among the many talented, brilliant experts and scientists who were part of this National Planning Committee, which is in fact the precursor to the Post-Independence Planning Commission of India, formed in 1951, was the famous Bengali scientist Dr. Meghnad Saha. And Netaji told him that he wanted a marriage of science and politics to guide the economic resurgence and the development of free India. So that was his vision. And I want to stress that this was not statism. This was not state centrism. It was just a pragmatic recognition that the free Indian state would, of necessity, have to take the leading role in India's post-colonial economic reconstruction and resurgence. Subhash Chandra Bose was never someone who idolized or fetishized state power, but he also felt that the state had a duty, a moral duty, to the people of the liberated subcontinent to lead and guide their economic reconstruction and resurgence, and the ending of the mass poverty and inequality that prevailed in India, where the life expectancy, the average life expectancy at the time of independence was not much more than 30 years old. And I can cite other truly frightening indicators of human development or lack thereof. So that was the challenge that Subhash Chandra Bose thought about very deeply, and that he would surely have prioritized had he taken the leadership of Free India or been part of the leadership of Free India. He, in fact, envisioned that it would take about 20 years for the economic reconstruction to take place that would set India on the path of lasting economic development. Unfortunately, even after 75 years of independence, we have failed. It is a collective failure of ours, all of us, to end the curse of poverty and the misery that it entails. We have failed to end the problem of inequality in all its myriad forms. But Netaji's message was that we must fight and eradicate poverty. We must combat and eliminate inequality in all its myriad forms. So that is an ideal for all of us to strive towards 75 years after independence. The second area of Netaji's vision that I want to briefly talk about is about women's rights and emancipation. Subhash Chandra Bose's political guru was someone that many of you will have heard of, but he's not as well known as he should be. Chittaranjan Das, Deshabandhu Chittaranjan Das, was the political guru of both Netaji and of my grandfather, Sharat Chandra Bose, who was himself a top leader of the national movement and an eminent freedom fighter in his own right. When Chittaranjan Das passed away very prematurely at the age of only 54 in June 1925, Netaji was in prison in Mandalay in Burma, where the British had deported him and put him in prison. He returned to India only in 1927 from the Burmese prisons, first in Mandalay and then later in Rangoon, or Yangon as it is known today. Once, when he heard about Deshabandhu's death, his political guru's premature passing, Netaji was devastated in prison. He was absolutely shattered. But then he got over his grief and started looking forward. And he resolved to complete the unfinished task or tasks that Deshabandhu had left him and others. What does he do? He soon starts asking, in fact, pestering, badgering Deshbandhu's widow, Bashanti Devi, to whom he was very close and whom he addressed as Ma or mother, literally used to call her Ma, to take up Deshbandhu's political mantle and become the new leader of the national movement in Bengal. Bashanti Devi politely declined, but Subhash, her dear Subhash, kept trying and was very angry with her and said that you are letting down your husband, you're letting all of us down, you're letting down the freedom movement. You must take over as the new leader of the national movement in Bengal, replacing your husband, Deshbandhu. By the late 1920s, my father, Shishir Kumar Bose, has written in his memoirs and autobiography of his early life, Subhash Chandra was pestering my grandmother, Sharad Bose's wife, Vibhabhati Bose, to take an active role in the freedom movement. He partly succeeded, but not to a great extent. So already we can see in the 1920s that he has this vision of women as equal and active participants in the independence movement. And that was a commitment that not only never left him, but became stronger and stronger and stronger with time. Its ultimate result of this commitment to women's rights and emancipation as equal citizens, as equal participants of the freedom movement, and as equal citizens of the future free India was the Rani of Jhansi Regiment of the Indian National Army. This was entirely Netaji's brainchild. It came into being because he insisted on it once he arrived in Southeast Asia to take up the leadership of the INA and of the Azad Hind movement more broadly. The Japanese were completely against it, but Netaji's will prevailed. The first parade, with 24 women in saris, but carrying not 303 Lee Enfield rifles, took place in Singapore on July 12th, 1943. And Netaji gave a historic address to them. In that address to the first recruits to the INA's Rani of Jhansi Regiment, his brainchild, he said, I am convinced that unless and until the women of India become equal participants in the national struggle, India cannot hope to be free. I am convinced that unless and until the women of India become equal participants in the national struggle, India cannot hope to be free. And that was also his vision of women as builders, along with men, of free India as equal citizens. The Rani of Jhansi Regiment, for those of you who don't know, though I suspect many of you do know about this legendary unit of the Indian National Army, was eventually 1,500 strong. Its commander was the quite legendary in her own right, Lakshmi Swaminathan, later Lakshmi Saigal, after her post-war marriage to another INA hero, Colonel Prem Kumar Saigal, who was one of the 3 INA officers tried at the Red Fort in late 1945. And the deputy commander of the Rani of Jhansi Regiment was someone who was recruited from Kuala Lumpur, who had never seen India in her life. She was just 18 years old. Her name was Janaki Thevar. She later became Janaki Athinahappan after her marriage. Lakshmi, Auntie Lakshmi, passed away in 2012 at her home in Kanpur. Auntie Janki passed away in 2014 at her home in Kuala Lumpur. They both worshipped Netaji till the very end of their lives. Lakshmi, the commander of the Rani of Jhansi Regiment, told my mother, Mrs. Krishna Bose, many times that, Krishna, you cannot even begin to imagine what a great feminist Netaji was. In January 1979, my father, Shishir Bose, organized a convention of the veterans of the Rani of Jhansi Regiment right here at Netaji Bhavan in Calcutta. I was a child then, I was 10 years old, but I do remember it quite vividly. And Lakshmi was present, Janki was present, Lakshmi gave the keynote speech, and in the keynote speech, Lakshmi said, quote unquote, that Netaji brought an identity and a sense of purpose to our lives as women. It is one of the tragedies of India's youth, both men and women, that since independence, they have had no inspired and idealistic leadership. The words of Lakshmi Saigal, spoken right here in Netaji Bhavan in January 1979. So have we lived up to Netaji's vision of women's rights and emancipation? Well, I think it's safe to say we should be self-critical that we haven't. There is much that is left to be done, and that is another of Netaji's ideals, his visionary ideals to strive towards, the equality and the emancipation of the women of India. The last of the three areas of Netaji's vision that I have chosen for this brief presentation to you is about his conception of the nation transcending religious identities and differences. Netaji famously said that India cannot be a land only of Hinduism or of Islam. India cannot be a land only of Hinduism or of Islam. It can only be one united land of different religious communities inspired by the ideal of nationalism. India can only be one united land of different religious communities inspired by the ideal of nationalism. I should mention here that Netaji's vision of interreligious harmony was not about interfaith solidarity, about respecting each other's faiths, or about a syncretistic narrative, Sarva Dharma Sambhava, or anything like that. He genuinely and strongly believed that Indian nationalism must be the supreme identity, transcending religious identities and differences, which would, of course, be a private matter for citizens and groups of citizens. So, for example, when he was in Germany, there was a 3,000 strong military unit called the Indian Legion that he set up and led in 1941, 1942, until his departure for Southeast Asia. The Indian Legion, the camps of the Indian Legion had temples, it had masjids, it had gurdwaras set aside for private worship. There is no problem with that. But ultimately, everyone identified as Indian. For public purposes and for the national struggle, Netaji believed that the Indian identity must transcend all other identities, including the religious faiths. Netaji was also completely above any kind of provincialism. When he won his second term as Congress president at the beginning of 1939 against Gandhiji's wishes by defeating Gandhiji's preferred candidate, Pattabhi Sitaramaiah, my father has written that there were celebrations going on in this house, Netaji Bhavan, and when the news of Subhash Chandra Bose's emphatic victory over Pattabhi Sitaramaiah came in, and some of Netaji's enthusiastic young supporters started saying that this is a great victory for Bengal against conspiracy. And Netaji, my father recalls and has written in his memoir, was extremely annoyed by this and essentially told them to, shut up, and said this is not about Bengal versus anybody else. This is a victory for principles. And of course, he was right, because Netaji won that contested election, not just in Bengal, hands down, but he also defeated Gandhiji's candidate in Punjab, the United Provinces, which is present-day Uttar Pradesh and Uttarakhand. Basically, in Assam, he won. He won in almost the whole of the south, except in Andhra, where Pattabhi Sitaramaiah was from. He trailed in only a few of the provinces, notably Andhra and Gujarat. So it was a huge all-India endorsement, and Netaji always identified as Indian, not Bengali, although, mind you, he was deeply attached to his Bengal homeland. Okay, now Netaji was able to implement his vision of Indian national unity, transcending religious divides, in an almost perfect, seamless form in the Azad Hind movement and the Indian National Army, which he led from 1943 to 1945. If you look at who the top commanders of the INA were in the field in India's northeast in 1944, the commander of the INA 1st Division, the senior-most field commander, was a man called Muhammad Zaman Kiani. One of the brigades of it was called the Gandhi Brigade of the 1st Division, which fought very tenaciously in the Manipur Hills in 1944, was led by Colonel Inayat Jan Kiani, who happened to be a relative, distant cousin, I believe, of Muhammad Zaman Kiani. Then there was Shah Nawaz Khan, of course, another famous figure. And remember that the British made that fatal miscalculation of putting one Hindu officer, one Muslim officer, and one Sikh officer of the Indian National Army on trial at the Red Fort in an act of senseless vengeance at the end of the war. Shah Nawaz Khan, Prem Kumar Saigal, and Gurbaksh Singh Dhillon. Except that Shah Nawaz, Prem Saigal, and Gurbaksh Dhillon did not think of themselves primarily, or perhaps even at all, as a Muslim, a Hindu, and a Sikh. They thought of themselves as Indians because they had fully imbibed the ideal of national identity and unity transcending their religious faiths that Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose not only preached but managed to implement in practice. It was a unique achievement of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose and is perhaps the most precious and relevant part of his ideological legacy today. I have spoken too long, so I'm going to finish now. But I'd like to tell you that in 1945, before Netaji left Singapore for the last time, he ordered in July 1945 that a monument, a martyr's memorial to the war dead, the fallen of the Indian National Army, should be erected on Singapore's sea face. The officer that he entrusted with the building, with the design and the building of this monument, happens to be a man called Cyril John Stracey, Colonel Cyril John Stracey, INA. He later became, like some of the other INA officers, a top diplomat in the Indian Foreign Service, from where he retired in the 1970s, and he passed away in November 1988. This was an Anglo-Indian officer, Cyril John Stracey, of the Indian National Army, who was personally entrusted by his leader and supreme commander with building the INA Martyrs Monument, the memorial that came up thanks to Stracey's efforts in record time on Singapore's seafront. Unfortunately, by the time the monument was ready for inauguration, sometime in the second half of August 1945, Netaji was no longer there, and the formal inauguration of the monument was carried out by Major General Muhammad Zaman Kiani on his behalf. On his departure from Singapore, Netaji had designated Muhammad Zaman Kiani as his representative to represent the provisional government of Free India, the Arzi Hukumat-e-Azad Hind, declared in Singapore 2 years earlier in October, 21st October 1943. I'll finish now. Just a little bit about Scotland. I was flicking through something just a bit earlier today, and I spoke to you towards the beginning of this talk about Netaji's epic submarine voyage around the world in 1943 on his way from Northern Europe to East Asia. And guess what? During the early part of that voyage in the German submarine, a U-boat with the number U-180, and the last 2 weeks of the submarine journey from Madagascar to Sumatra were in a Japanese submarine, an I-29, to which he was transferred in a hair-raising mid-ocean transfer towards the end of April 1943. But I'm talking about February 1943. In the early part of that epic submarine voyage under the sea in a world at war, Netaji passed just a little bit north of Scotland in the North Sea. His submarine, the German U-boat U-180, traversed the North Sea just north of Scotland in the area between Scotland and Iceland, sometime for several days sometime in February 1943. This was an exceptionally dangerous area, one of the most dangerous areas of the voyage, because the British used to depth bomb the North Sea, north of Scotland, in the hope of bagging, German U-boats that were operating there. But fortunately, Netaji was able to get through the North Sea, travel north of Scotland safely, and enter the Atlantic Ocean for the onward journey. So that is a little piece of Scotland for you. Again, I apologize for speaking for so long. I hadn't intended to, but I congratulate our consulate in Scotland and the members of Subhash for putting on this program. It's been a privilege to join you, and I just hope that all of us can reflect on the lessons of Netaji's vision, and in our own small ways as Indian patriots and citizens, contribute to making that unfulfilled vision a reality in the near future. Jai Hind.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sumantra Bose, for taking us through the life, vision, and legacy of Netaji. Today, we learned several aspects of Netaji, which we were not aware of earlier. And thanks again for allowing us peep into the house where from Netaji made a great escape. Thank you. It was really such a wonderful, experience. I cannot describe that. And sir, I hope that in future also you will keep us enlightening on the topic. Now it is time for a couple of wonderful patriotic songs. No celebration relating to Netaji is complete without tributes to him through the patriotic songs, as he is such a great patriot. We have the melodious voice of Rupsa with us today. In today's program, she will be accompanied by Subranil on guitar and Rick on keyboard. All three artists are from Sabas. So let us welcome Rupsa, Subranil, and Rick. Please.
Hello.
Stand हटा दीजिए.
Good evening, Scotland, and I think it's almost good night back in India. It's 125th birth anniversary of our very own Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. We've heard so much about him today, and we've been hearing about him, we've read in history and heard from everybody in the family, from our elders, whenever we've talked about freedom. And thank you, CGI India, Edinburgh, and Shabash for giving us this opportunity to perform today. I think it's a coincidence that Netaji was born in 1897, and the first song that I'm going to perform today is based on a film, Kesari, which is about the Battle of Sargarhi. I think this was again back in 1897. तेरी सांसों पे थोड़ा सा वतन का भी ना देख मुझे मुड़ मुड़ के तेरा मेरा साथी नहीं तकता ये तेरी जमीन तेरी खून से ही तो सजती संवरती है रांझे तेरे इश्क की मैं हकदार नहीं तेरी हीर तो भरती है तेरी मिट्टी ही में मिल जाऊं बढ़ के मैं खिल जाऊं इतनी सी दिल की आरज़ू तेरी नदियों में बह जाऊं तेरी तूफां में लहराऊं इतनी सी दिल की आरज़ू तेरी ज़मीं अफ़सोस नहीं जो तेरे लिए सुमदर्द सही महफूज रही तेरे आन से चाहे जान में the last song for the evening. Vande Mataram.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Event, but no event can end without word of thanks. So I nominate myself for representing the one. So it gives me pleasure to say thanks if I really feel grateful to somebody. Respected Dr. Sumandra Bose, we are really thankful to you for sparing your precious time. I'm well aware how busy you have been today. In spite of your being away in India, you agreed to devote your time at this odd hour as far as local time in Kolkata is concerned. We really feel grateful to you. Thanks again. Thank you so much. I thank Sabas in general and Ranjit Sinhaji, Kajal Dattaji, and their team in particular to help the Indian Consulate organize today's event, which is a tribute to our beloved Netaji. Thank you, Consul General Sir, for sparing time on a holiday. Today's program would not have been possible without your guidance. My special thanks to Tanvi Bhattacharya, Rupsa, Subranil, and Rick for the wonderful performances. The performances add color to the event, and This is the need of the arts, especially in today's environment. I'm also thankful to my colleagues of the Indian Consulate who contributed towards making today's event a success. Thanks, Hari and other colleagues. Last but not least, a big thank you for all the online audience. On behalf of the Consul General, I wish to reiterate that for Indian nationals and people and persons of Indian origin, the Consulate General of India in Edinburgh is your home away from home. If you have any issues, please don't hesitate to contact either me or the Consul General directly. We will always be glad to help you out. Thank you all for watching the event. Namaste. And as Netaji slogan, Jai Hind. Thank you.
Jai.